And that is just one of many horrendous, downright god-awful pieces of dialogue to be heard in Piranha DD, or, as it's fondly called here in the States, Piranha Double Dookie, or, as I like to call it, embarrassing shit sequel to a decent horror comedy. Welcome to the first episode of Worst Horror Sequels. I'm your host, Joshua, and I'm just a guy who loves horror movies. I always have. I'll watch nearly any horror title you throw at me, whether it be classic German expressionist films like Nosferatu or The Golem, or enjoyable schlock like The Blob, or hell, even Troll 2. And make me choose between Hitchcock and Argento, and you bet I'd gravitate towards the latter every single time. And I watch at least 5 new horror films every week. That's how much I love the genre. And, as someone who's watched hundreds upon hundreds of horror films, I can safely say I've stumbled upon an unpleasantly large amount of shitty sequels. They come at me like a herd of elephants ready to stomp all over my skull. Now, don't get me wrong, watching a shitty horror movie can be a fun, almost euphoric experience. But every now and then I come across one that really dampens my spirits, so much I can't help but rant about it, and then cry about it afterwards. First up is Piranha DD, the 2012 sequel to the 2010 film Piranha, directed by Alexandre Aja, who also helmed such titles as High Tension and the 2006 remake of The Hills Have Eyes. Aja is a visceral filmmaker whose films often display copious amounts of gore and bloodshed. But there's an artistic quality to his filmmaking, and even if you can't stand the gore, you can at least admit he's an effective filmmaker, and he does take the craft seriously. In 2010, he released Piranha, an outrageously silly horror comedy that embraces campy nature by delivering tons of over-the-top gore and bloodshed, but in a wink-wink sort of manner. It was a fun, decent B-flick, and you really can't beat Ving Rhames slicing up a bunch of piranha with a saw. The film was a modest hit, so to reward audiences for their loyalty, Dimension Films, in all of their infinite wisdom, decided to release a sequel a couple years later. And now we must suffer through Piranha DD, an exceedingly cheap TV Movie of the Week sequel that is amateurishly directed, with some of the worst dialogue I've ever heard in a mainstream motion picture.
I just want to let you know whatever happens. I love you since 7th grade. I always will.
I thought you were gay.
Really?
Right off the bat, I noticed the inferior camera work. This is such a downgrade from the previous film. Whereas that film was filled with scenic shots and kinetic camera work, this shitstorm looks like something you might find on the CW network. It's horribly framed, often giving the impression that the director had no idea how he wanted to film a scene, and instead told his director of photography to just film people and things at random. Also, boob shots. Yeah. Just watch porn on the internet if you're into that kind of thing. The editing is also atrocious. Much of the film looks like poorly sliced together montages from Girls Gone Wild, and it's very distracting whenever obvious footage from GoPro is thrown in. This happens several times throughout the film. I'm assuming it's because the filmmakers didn't want to damage the more expensive equipment they were using, so we get a handful of pixelated shots that look like home movie footage. How freaking embarrassing. Something I look for in a horror movie is likable characters. I like to have someone to root for. This film has none of that. You have David Koechner doing the same old shtick he's done before in countless other titles like Anchorman, Krampus, The Office, etc. You have the stereotypical teens who just want to have sex with each other as quickly as possible. My god, I can't believe this is still a trope used in horror. It wore out its welcome years ago and I'm sick of seeing it played out. Also, this film features a scene where a piranha swims up a girl's vagina and later bites a man's penis off during intercourse. Holy cheese balls. The only actor who gives a semi-amusing performance is Christopher Lloyd. But would you expect anything else from him? It's Christopher Lloyd, the Doc himself. You know what the biggest surprise is? The first hour or so of this movie is surprisingly dull. I mean, sure, we get some piranha attacks scattered here and there, but they're not creative in the slightest. The first film had some really creative death scenes, my favorite being the girl who gets the skin on her face ripped off by a propeller blade. The majority of this film was just a bunch of quickly edited close-ups of fish gobbling on human flesh. The last 30 minutes or so at a water park are a tad bit more exciting, but again, there's not a single creative death scene. We see the mangled bodies of unfortunate park patrons, but that's about it. Also, there's some incredibly awful CGI blood spurts in this sequence. Piranha Double D is a travesty and completely takes a shit on the art of filmmaking. And I can enjoy mindless schlock. The first Piranha knew exactly what it was and at least had some artistic merit woven in. This disaster is like someone serving you a moldy fast food sandwich on a plate and telling you to find at least something to enjoy about it, but there isn't anything to enjoy. Making an enjoyable B-movie is not easy, and it requires an understanding of how to find the right balance between schlock and frights. Watch the original version of The Blob, or, an even better example, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Just don't watch this dreadful piece of crap. It's not worth it, and honestly, I just hope that we will not be getting another sequel, because unfortunately, this film does set up for more sequels at the end, and it really sickens me.